The ratchet cranked in his busted hand, the knuckles on his right hand caked in dried blood and grease. Core's hand ached and was stiffened into the shape that holds the ratchet. He had been tightening bolts for hours attaching the outer shell to the rocket. He had painted the entire rocket shell in blaze orange with a bright red lightning bolt down the sides outlined in black. He had christened it the Bolt. "Core, come eat your damn dinner already," his wife yelled out the back door. He decided now was the time to quit for the day before her anger simmered into an explosive boil. The chilly nighttime air blew in through the open doors of the barn, but it did little to cool his overworked body. Finally, the last bolt was tightened. Core wiped his hands with an old rag as he stood back to admire his life's work. This was an old Ingold Model TR-3B he found in a scrapyard 20 years ago. 20 years before that, it had most likely been the toy of a rich kid who used it to zoom to the moon and back to show off to his girlfriend. At 40 years old, Core was satisfied that it was ready for a test flight, but he wasn't going to tell his wife. Stiff-legged and exhausted, Core shuffled his way inside and hastily ate his dinner, took a shower, and collapsed into bed. At night, he dreamed of the burning excitement he had longed for. He had completed the safety checks and climbed into the cockpit. He flipped the switch to activate the power, then the switch to prime the thruster. As it heated up, he started the engine and heard it roar to life. The loud whining of the jet engine was growing, as if the rocket were dying for its first flight in those long 40 years. "Core, wake the hell up. All you want to do is sleep anymore. The crows need to be fed, the chicken eggs need to be collected, and the horse needs to be brushed. I need you to do all of this before you start tinkering with that toy." So close. His wife had interrupted yet another glorious dream of escaping from this never-ending hell. 20 years ago, when he bought the rocket, he still loved his wife dearly. She was happy, beautiful, and still as vibrant as the sun. Now, she was nearly always angry with him. Her beauty had faded into a constant grimace, and she was always finding a way to boss him around. All of those things had completely removed any feelings of affection he had for her. Core grabbed a clean pair of overalls and headed toward the back door to start his chores. "Now listen, Core, I'm going to my mother's for the weekend. I might even stay a week, I don't know yet. I just need to get away from this place for a while." "Me too," he thought. "Okay, dear," he replied instead as he turned around to trudge towards the animals. He was in the middle of collecting the chicken eggs when it dawned on him. Now's my chance. There were nice places on the moon in those days. It had been 50 years since the first city had been founded. It was completely enclosed in a dome, fed by massive oxygen tanks that were refilled weekly from shipments that came from Earth. Now, there are 10 more cities. Core was always seeing jobs listed in ads saying that there were some nice retirement communities up there with a great view of the Earth. Hell, he even seen factory jobs offering a complimentary apartment to live in on company property. Anything would be better than being stuck in a life with a wife who obviously didn't love him anymore. Core toiled for a few hours before he finished his chores. He dashed inside the house. In his closet, he found an old suitcase that hadn't been used since their first vacation to Bermuda 36 years before. The dust was so thick, it had to be wiped off with a sleeve. Inside, he found an old picture of them on that trip. A young, happy, content, and able-bodied couple embracing each other with grins as wide as their faces. Time isn't fair, he thought. He sat the photo on the bed and packed a week's worth of clothes. About a year ago, he had driven down to the courthouse to get the documents necessary to file for divorce. Core tried and tried to work up the nerve, but he was so afraid of his wife that he never could work the nerve up to do it. He had already signed his part, the ink had long dried, along with a few fresh tears, and he left the rest on the bed for her to complete. Outside, Core climbed onto his tractor to pull the rocket out of the barn toward a concrete pad that he had placed in the middle of his field just for this purpose a long time ago. In the barn, he retrieved the ladder. He was going to use it to climb into the cockpit and the suit he had bought from the junkyard that was in near mint condition. Core evaluated the oxygen tanks to make sure that he could breathe in the suit. He also checked that the suit had no holes. At the rocket, he ran over a safety checklist on a clipboard, flying through it with gleeful excitement that a child might have on their way to a theme park. Check, check, and more checks. He could barely contain his excitement. Core dashed up the ladder, nearly tripping twice on the way up. He had spent a long time fixing the cockpit. It had taken him over a decade to collect all the necessary parts from the scrappers and the parts dealers online. After all his efforts, it looked brand spanking new. He had spent the last week polishing and refining all the buttons, screens, and coverings. He had also vigorously assessed each dial, sensor, and knob. The rocket radiated with the infamous new car smell. His grin stretched from ear to ear. The seatbelt snapped with a crisp click. The straps tightened perfectly. He flipped the switch to turn on the power and switched to prime the thruster. The engine roared to life. It was even better than his dream. The vibrations made the floor hum with life. From his position, he could see the approaching evening sky. The moon had already appeared, as if greeting him. While he was tending to the animals, he had looked up the evening's best time to launch for his area. It would arrive in 3 minutes. He was digging through his bag to double-check that he had brought all the necessary documents to immigrate to the moon, and found that he had accidentally packed the picture of him and his wife from all those years ago in Bermuda. He unbuckled from his seat, staring at it for several moments, remembering the good times they had. No, he thought, this is my old life. He tossed the old photo out the door. It fluttered down to the ground, landing below the thrusters on the launch pad. This is Delta 242839er. Am I clear to launch? Core said into his radio to the FAA. Roger that, you are clear for takeoff, the attendant replied. Roger. Launching in T-minus 30 seconds. Roger that, Delta 243839er. He flipped a switch to ignite the flames of the thruster, which would build up the pressure needed to launch. T-minus 10, he yelled as he set coordinates in his guidance system. 0. He flipped the final switch. His thrusters roared to life. Core was yanked back in his seat with such force that it slammed his teeth together in a painful wave. Soon, he was almost out to the troposphere. The rocket jerked as he entered the stratosphere, then the mesosphere. About halfway through the mesosphere, the rocket began to rattle violently, so much that he could barely keep his hands on the controls. Nothing Core had read said that this was normal. He began to panic. He debated if he should abandon the flight and turn around immediately. But he was so close. Just one more layer before he was free. Could he last just a few more agonizing minutes? Core decided to persevere. This old relic was tough. He spent so much time on it that it was basically brand new again. The cockpit began to get extremely hot, baking him like a sauna. Sweat poured down his face into his eyes. At first he thought it was just his nerves, then he realized his soles were starting to get hot as well. Something was going very wrong. Flames erupted from the engine compartment into the cockpit from underneath. His seat began to melt underneath him. The nearly mint-condition suit began to melt to his skin. The pain was unbearably excruciating. He cried out in agony as he frantically tried to reach for the eject button. But he realized that the shaking rocket and the G-forces made it impossible for him to reach it. For some reason, at that moment, all he could think of was his wife. He thought of them in their younger days, of that trip to Bermuda, of the ocean waves lapping over his feet as they sipped fruity drinks at that nice resort. The sun warmed and tanned his young skin. The love they made in the hotel every single night as the moon shone through the open blinds. He almost wanted to smile. The explosion killed him instantly.